Well, as they say in the news business, that's quite a headline, a commitment to put 24 into place here. So that is this is a center of action. I'd have to say that's a pretty powerful statement. Before we jump into our fireside chat, what's your reaction to it? Because we were just talking this morning about the challenge, as he had said in our panel, that it's a dark place, they need to start moving quickly. But that's a pretty strong commitment. I'd love to get your reaction as the Swedish Minister for Climate and Environment.
First of all, I'm really sorry I can't have a similar announcement.
I was going to say, we don't have any surprises for you in our...
Whatever we say in this coming 20 minutes is going to be rather, well...
We'll make sure it's not dull.
Yeah, we'll do our best, but then again, obviously, as we heard this morning, Poland is emitting right now almost 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide per kilowatt hour of electricity. So this is really needed. Putting reactors in Poland makes, right today, the biggest difference in the world. Putting them anywhere else would make a smaller difference to climate. So that Poland does this is of course very important.
Good. I think it's an honor to do the fireside chat. We had a moment to talk in the green room, but your plan to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 59% by the end of this decade, a net zero economy by 2045, if not before, we'll have that discussion. And you were the first country in the world to introduce a carbon tax, which was pretty bold at that time. And I'd love to talk to you about why that accelerated the transition that Sweden's benefiting from today. You're a reactor physicist, but you're a big follower of history, and that emerged in our discussion in the green room. But can you go back to that period of time in 1990, 1991, and what it meant on the pathway to where you are today?
Maybe we have to go a bit further back, because in 1990 we were already doing quite well on our reduction path. The big reduction we made was from the peak in emissions in 1970-71 down to and that's when we started implementing the nuclear program. We constructed 12 reactors. We commissioned 12 reactors in 13 years, from 1972 to 85. We did that because of energy security and competitiveness of the industry and the country. Accidentally, we happened to decarbonize the grid and reduce our national emissions by 30%. So one of the most successful climate actions that we've seen was in fact not really a climate action. It was just accidental. But we've proven that it's doable. And what happened in the mid-80s when all the reactors were commissioned was that the grid was decarbonized. And we also had a lot of electricity because we happened to overbuild a little bit. So we started electrifying everything because electricity was really cheap. Industry, domestic heating were the two main ones. So electrification of industry went quite far already in the 80s, 90s. So what happened was that we got this drop in 30% emissions, and then it continued downwards. And that's when we come to 1990, 91, and the carbon tax was introduced. That obviously further increased the pressure to electrified. It made heating oil more expensive, so that people started changing to heat pumps. If you would have told someone in 1975 that we will forbid your oil furnace in your house, we would have had a revolution and people would still be burning oil in their homes. Now, we didn't do that. Rather, we supported development of heat pumps. Initially, we had some government support for the first people that installed them, and then oil suddenly costed more than $1,000 per cubic meter, and I can remember my grandma saying to my father that this was the last time I'm paying an oil bill, you solved the problem. So that's when my father went and bought a heat pump for my grandmother, and she never burned oil again.
Huh. You know, it's interesting, I don't want to deviate here, but they're trying to introduce heat pumps in the UK. The supply is low, everybody says the first generation is not efficient. But you've cracked it in Sweden. Why?
We quit oil heating. You don't see smoke from Swedish homes anymore. Well, some people burn wood in the countryside, but then the air is clean in the suburbs because there are no oil heating anymore. It's got heat pumps. The one where we drill a hole, it's quite efficient. And then in summer houses, we use the cheaper ones, which is air to air. Consumes a little bit more electricity, but much cheaper to install. And if you just want to heat the house in the weekends, that's fine.
Great. The roadmap for energy, and what does it mean for nuclear? Because you're going into a new phase. You've had nuclear, but you're going to the next phase of what that journey looks like.
We cleaned up electricity in the 80s, but we solved the problems. We had cheap, abundant electricity without emissions. But we still wanted to debate electricity politically. So we started talking about whether we like blue power plants or pink power plants. And I like this one better than that. And we had this discussion for 40 years about which plant you like better. Electricity, abundant and cheap, was taken for granted until suddenly, a couple of years ago, it wasn't cheap and abundant anymore. And we really got high prices that no one ever dreamt of. And that's when people realized that, wait a minute, we have to start thinking of what's going on behind the socket. How does electricity come to me in my apartment? And that's when people started really thinking of, politics started thinking about the physics behind electricity. So we have a completely different discussion now, and we're talking where we see that we have to double the electricity system to manage the rest of the electrification of industry and transport sector. And somehow that has to be done in a reliable and robust way. We see that we need dispatchable capacity in this expansion of the grid. The rivers are dammed already. We can't burn much more biomass because we need it for other things, plus we like our forests. So which dispatchable source of energy is there left then? Well, it's the only one we have is nuclear, and that goes for most countries globally, that we don't have many options of fossil-free, clean, dispatchable capacity that can be scaled. So I claim that there are basically three means of producing electricity without emissions on a large scale. That's solar, it's wind, and it's nuclear, and only nuclear is dispatchable. We haven't seen any grids anywhere yet without a significant share of dispatchable capacity, so nuclear will be needed basically everywhere.
I read an IAEA review that said that Sweden is an example of to handle nuclear waste. You take a great deal of pride. Is that because of the responsibility in government to make sure there's full trust by your population in which to do so, and it allows you to do the expansion, and they know government has a role, and one of those is safety and security?
Also, this is a long story. We started back in 1974, and then since then we've developed the method, and the government has been overseeing the company doing this, owned by the nuclear industry. So every 3 years the government has given a green light saying, okay, we like what you do, keep going. And then 2 years ago, there was a decision in principle in the government that allows the construction of the repository and the encapsulation plant. So now the project is in a stepwise licensing process with the nuclear regulator. And
Good.
Building is starting pretty soon, so problem
But the
solved.
trust factor with your society, you have the trust.
Oh yeah, the communities have been involved all along for decades. Everybody has been educated. Boards selected by the people have been scrutinizing the application in detail, and they have held all these seminars. And then in the end, the community could veto the decision, blocking it if they would have wanted to. But the support for the repository is very strong. There's around 80% positive to building it.
Great. 2 reactors by 2035 and 10 by 2040.
This is the government's
pretty big for a small country.
Yeah, it's the government roadmap. It comes from our ambition to be climate neutral by 2045. We see that electrification is key to achieve this. Biomass is also going to be interesting. By direct electrification through cables and batteries, and indirect electrification through electrofuels, hydrogen, ammonia, will be the way to do it. And how do we produce electricity? Well, wind and nuclear mainly is the one we can add in Sweden. Solar to some extent, but as you said, it's dark. And then we need dispatchable capacity. So counting backwards, how much electricity would you need to replace fossil fuels while staying competitive? We end up at roughly doubling our system at least, and most of the dispatchable capacity, or all of it, has to be nuclear, and that means we need 10 reactors in the 40s, corresponding to 10 big ones. If we, like Poland, build BWRs, BWRX 300, then of course it's 3 times as many, so around 30. We don't say which reactor, but we say that this is the scale of the program that is going to be needed. Then we're a market economy, and companies will have to build this. But this is the aim of the government and the agencies, to make this a possibility.
Interesting. How do you manage that on the fiscal side, would you say? Can you plan accordingly? And one of the arguments in the UK is that nuclear implementation, like we have at Hinkley, is large scale, super expensive.
Yeah.
What's the approach that you're suggesting as a government?
It's a chicken and egg problem, really. People can't invest in steel mills and fertilizer plants and so on unless they know there's going to be electricity. Right now, I read today that we have applications for 20.5 gigawatts of additional capacity from consumption. That's already been applied for by the TSO. Compare that to the Swedish peak consumption of 24.5 today. So it's almost a doubling of our peak consumption. That's the applications they already have from industries interested in investing. So obviously none of that is going to happen unless there is electricity added in a robust the system is expanded in a robust way. So this means that the other part of the chicken egg problem is that no one is going to invest in power plants, especially not capital intense power production, unless they know that the consumption is there. So what I tell these people is go and talk to each other, but they don't really trust each other because the plant is going to be there in 10 or 15 years, and who knows if this company is still around that asked for the electricity. So that's where the government has to step in to take care of some risks. So we say that we will, in our roadmap, we say we will look into risk sharing between different parts of society, because we know we need this. So we have to make it happen, and we have to solve the chicken and egg problem.
Great. How does this dovetail into the Fit for 55 policy then? You're going to be ahead of where the European Union is, but you take that Fit for 55 really seriously?
Actually, the European Union caught up quite well with Sweden. We used to be one of the most ambitious countries in the continent, but now with Fit for 55, which by the way is binding legislation to reach minus 55% emissions by 2030 as compared to 1990. We now have binding legislation that takes us past 55%. So we know that we will reach our 2030 targets, provided people follow the laws. Now, Sweden is one of the countries, because burdens were distributed a little bit unevenly depending on your possibilities and the strength of your economy and so on. So we have one of the, let's call it, heavier burdens, but we have a plan on how to do this. It's just a little bit urgent, but it's also an opportunity, I would say. We often talk about the urgency that we all know of, but also the opportunity, because this is challenging to Europe to do this. It will change things, but it's also an opportunity for us to develop the technology that we know that we need. It's a reason for us to electrify industry and also add more industries. That we will take more of the fertilizer production in the world to Sweden, because we have cheap and clean electricity, and we will have more of it.
Great. What is the journey for Swedish industry, knowing you're building this base load, do you say? What's the vision for where you want to go to in future industry? It was forestry in the past. You said you have this ability to go into fertilizers. You have the technology know-how to build a base on. But what is your government suggesting? If we do this, X with the nuclear base, this is what we'll get with Y and Z.
Well, sometimes in the past, in some countries, you've heard the idea that one way to solve the climate challenge is to do less of industry. I see it the other way around, because if you produce especially energy-intensive products and services in the north of Sweden, and well, where the hydropower and the wind, most of the wind is, but also when we add more nuclear in the south, that will be clean products, and when we export those to the rest of the world, it's a miracle to consumption-based emissions. Right? Producing this with some other dirtier energy somewhere else would have a high climate impact, which steel, fertilizer, electrofuels, and also the servers in the AI server halls that we heard of, doesn't have that climate impact in Sweden. So we see it as an opportunity for us to expand our industry, but also making good use for the climate work globally.
Good. One of the issues that hasn't been brought up so far at Net Zero Nuclear, because we're looking at the development of this sector, of course, is the role of efficiency. And I was just wondering, you kind of take pride as a country and as a population that's pretty attuned to efficiency, and also the shock of Russia-Ukraine. You know, it did disrupt natural gas supplies to the European Union. Can you combine the two, and why, if you have a focus of government to say we want to have efficiency as part of your mindset as a populace, you can make a difference?
Let's start with the efficiency then. I claim it's always been the most important tool we had to meet our energy challenges throughout history. From when we started burning wood, people started thinking, how can I use less wood to do the same cooking or heating? And that's been a big thing. We had hundreds of years ago, we had a competition to save wood in domestic heating because we didn't have enough wood any longer for the industry. And they came up with a stove oven that was used for 100 years as the main source of heating in Swedish homes, which saves a lot of wood rather than open fire. But this energy efficiency has been driven by the same factors that drive growth. It's about using your resources in a smarter way to produce more goods for humanity. And sometimes you can make a profit, or you cut less wood, or whatever. Now, and all of that is obviously driven by economic factors. If people can make a profit, if a company can make a profit from changing their process a little bit, they will do it, unless they have some other priority which they have to do first. And that's usually what's blocking. So when people say the potential is huge, it probably is, but there are logics in the boardroom that you have to do this first before you can care about this one.
Yeah.
And you don't want to expose your activities to too big risk either. So you have to think rationally about this.
A final question, which is obviously not one of the subjects we've been focused on at all, but when I was researching our discussion together, your waste to energy is extraordinary, because you know there's only 1% of waste out of all the garbage that's produced in Sweden. So what's been the magic there?
That's 1% of domestic waste.
Yeah.
So still, if you start counting the mining waste, for example, that's
higher.
Big piles of rock that we treat as waste and put in a pile. But so look at domestic waste. What do? Well, first of all, we don't put organic waste on landfills. So we want to reuse it. We burn the plastics in district heating plants. We have a need for heat and hot water all year around, so we do that. And then we produce biogas from the food waste. Now, we also started recycling much more than we used to do some time ago. So now we're actually importing organic waste from other European countries because we need it for the district heating plants. There was a lack of waste suddenly to run the plants. But then again, there's lots of waste in the European continent, so we'd rather burn it than put it in landfills with all the methane leaking.
But you know what's coming out of this discussion is if you just think it through in terms of leadership, right, policy, and you get that into society, it can be a collective good. Is that what your lesson is in Sweden?
Well, you should always use the resources in the smartest way. Then again, when we run out of waste in the European continent, I guess we will have to replace the district heating plants for small modular reactors, and in the end, we will find a way to heat our homes.
Good. It's nice to have you, right? Thanks. For being very open-minded across the full spectrum of topics. Can we give a nice welcome?
Thanks
to
very much.
Daniel Westlén. Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.